ceased. In the Black Sea, the Ukrainians have pushed back the Russian fleet and established routes for grain exports, bolstering global food security. Most importantly, Ukraine has prevailed as a sovereign, independent, democratic nation. This is a major achievement, a big win. As Ukraine has moved forward, Russia has fallen backward. It is now weaker politically, militarily, and economically. Politically, Russia is losing influence in its near abroad, not only in Ukraine, but in Caucasus and Central Asia. Russia is also becoming much more dependent on China. Year by year, Moscow is mortgaging its future to Beijing. Militarily, Russia has lost a substantial part of its conventional forces. Hundreds of aircraft, thousands of tanks, and more than 300,000 casualties. Economically, Russia is also under pressure. Oil and gas revenues are dropping. Russian banking assets are under sanctions. Over 1,000 foreign companies have stopped or scaled down their operations in the country, and 1.3 million people left Russia last year. All of this underlines Putin's strategic mistake in invading Ukraine. At the same time, we must not underestimate Russia. Russia's economy is on a war footing. Putin has a high tolerance for casualties, and Russian aims in Ukraine have not changed. Russia has amassed a large missile stockpile ahead of winter, and we see new attempts to strike Ukraine's power grid and energy infrastructure, trying to leave Ukraine in the dark and cold. I welcome that allies are continuing to strengthen Ukraine's air defenses. Last week, 20 NATO allies agreed to form an air defense coalition for Ukraine. This will help protect Ukraine's armed forces and cities and save Ukrainian lives. We are now transforming NATO's comprehensive assistance package into a multi-year program of assistance, helping Ukraine to transition from Soviet era to NATO equipment and standards, and make their forces fully interoperable with ours. We also discussed Ukraine's path to NATO membership. Allies agreed that Ukraine will become a member of NATO. We have now provided recommendations on Ukraine's priority reforms, including the fight against corruption, strengthening the rule of law, and supporting human rights and minority rights. Ukraine is closer to NATO than ever before. We will continue to support them on the path to membership, and will continue to support Ukraine's fight for freedom. And with that, I'm ready to take some questions.
We'll start with the New York Times, please, in the fourth row.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary General, could you please be a little more specific on what reforms the Allies asked Ukraine to undertake on its path to NATO membership? Fighting corruption, strengthening rule of law and human rights, these are all things that Allies have demanded for years with mixed success at the very best. Why would Ukraine be able to implement these now when it focuses on fighting a war? And what, if any, timeline was decided on these reforms to be enacted?
I'm actually impressed by Ukraine's commitment to implement reforms to modernize their society in the midst of a full-scale war. And we have seen that they have implemented changes in the legislation. They have made concrete changes, not least in the fight against terrorism. They are in the process of setting up and overhauling the system for defense procurement in close coordination with NATO, and also modernizing their intelligence services. These are just a couple or 3 examples of how actually Ukraine is changing, adapting, and stepping up, not least in the fight against the corruption, but also in overhauling their system for procurement of defense equipment. This is important for Ukraine because it helps them to be a stronger country fighting Russia as an aggressor, but it also helps them to move closer to NATO membership. And therefore, one of the messages, one of the important topics we addressed at the meeting today was how could NATO allies work even more closely with Ukraine on these reforms, and also how we can use the NATO-Ukraine Council to ensure the full implementation. And we have agreed a work program and substructure under committees under the NATO-Ukraine Council to ensure that we follow up concretely on the reforms and the modernization of the Ukrainian society.
And a timeline, sir? When would these reforms need to be undertaken?
Many of them are already, implemented, and this is an ongoing effort. We have seen concrete steps from the Ukrainian authorities in the fight against corruption. Decisions has been taken, so this is ongoing, and things they are in the process of implementing.
We'll go to Ukrainian media in the second row here, please.
Olga Kirillova, Chasna News Agency, Ukraine. Secretary General, currently Ukrainian pilots are trained in Romania to operate and maintain F-16 fighter jets. Is it possible now to outline the time frame for the actual supply of fighter jets to Ukraine, and what factors or obstacles affect this process at this point? Thank you.
Well, I welcome, of course, the decision by NATO allies, Denmark, the Netherlands, Norway, to deliver F-16s. I welcome the fact that training of F-16 pilots have already started, and just a few weeks ago, a center for training pilots was established in Romania. I'm not able to give you an exact date, but I hope the delivery can start as soon as possible. The planes are there, but what needs to be done is to train the pilots, and that's ongoing. And the center has been established in Romania, and the United States has also made it clear that NATO allies are allowed to deliver F-16s to Ukraine. Then I think it is important that of course, F-16s will make a difference. They will strengthen Ukraine's capacity to inflict losses on the Russian invading forces. And F-16s will also help to further strengthen Ukraine's air defenses. At the same time, I think we need to now realize that there is not a silver bullet, not a single system that by itself will change fundamentally the situation on the battlefield. This is a question of many different capabilities working together at the same time that will push the Russians back. We have to be prepared for a long and hard fight. I welcome, of course, the delivery of modern battle tanks, HIMARS, cruise missiles, and advanced air defense systems, and also the delivery of F-16s. But again, there is no silver bullet, there is no single system that fundamentally would change the situation on the battlefield by itself.
We'll take a couple from further up. We'll go to NTB there, please.
Thank you. Bibiana Piena from the Norwegian News Agency. I'd like to change the focus a little bit to Gaza. Mr. General Secretary, yesterday you stated that international humanitarian law must be respected in every context. Lately, several countries, Norway among them, has condemned both Hamas and Israel for breaching of international humanitarian law. In your opinion, is Israel breaching humanitarian law in its fight against Hamas on the Gaza Strip? Thank you.
I have stated again and again that it is important that international law is respected and that civilians are protected, and therefore I've also called for a pause in the hostilities, and I welcome the pause that has been agreed, and I also welcome the extension of the pause agreed a couple of days ago, and I also hope that the conditions could be in place to agree a further extension of the pause in the hostilities. Yes, it is important that humanitarian law applies to all conflicts, and that has been and continues to be my message. We have also seen clear statements from many other allies on this issue.
We'll go next to the Washington Post. Also back here, please.
Thanks very much, Michael Birnbaum from the Washington Post. General Zaluzhny has talked about the stalemate, and you said that allies all agree that a full NATO membership for Ukraine is not possible in the middle of a war. So I was wondering if you talked today or yesterday about the mechanisms by which Ukraine in a stalemated war might be admitted to NATO and how that would work. And you just mentioned that Russia is mortgaging its future to China. Could you tell us a little more in detail what evidence you have of Russian reliance on Beijing in this war? Thank you.
We see the economic reliance. We see how Russia becomes more and more dependent on China for financing, for commodities, and also for key commodities for their defense industry. And also the fact that Russia is not not able to export energy in the same way they did before to Europe, which was their main and most important market, not least for natural gas. That makes them even more dependent on China. So yes, year by year, Moscow is mortgaging their future to Beijing, and this is one of the examples of how Russia is becoming more and more weak economically as a result of this war. Then I think we need to realize that, yes, we haven't seen significant changes in the front line over the last months, but there is intense fighting going on. And of course, military achievements can be measured in many different ways. It can be measured in square meters. And of course, then what we saw last year was that the Ukrainians were able to liberate enormous or big, significant parts of their territory, pushing back the Russians from roughly 50% of what they occupied at the beginning of the war. So that was a big gain measured in square kilometers or square meters. But there are other ways of also measuring military gains for the Ukrainians. The fact that they've been able to have deep strikes destroying key Russian capabilities, including fighter jets, heavy bombers, helicopters. The fact that they have been able, without actually a real navy, to push back the Russian Black Sea Fleet all the way to Novorossiysk, and thereby also enabling the fact that they now can transport grain on ships out from Odessa and through the Black Sea. That's a huge gain that cannot be measured in square meters, but is measured in destroying Russian capabilities, pushing back the Black Sea Fleet, and enabling them to move grain out of Ukraine on the Black Sea. So the fact that Ukraine continues to inflict heavy losses on Russia is a way, or demonstrates that there's a dynamic war, it's an intense war going on, where the Ukrainians, because of their bravery, their skill, but also, of course, with modern weapons from NATO allies, the Storm Shadows, the cruise missiles from the United Kingdom, advanced air defense systems, and many other types of weapons are able actually to inflict heavy losses and also then achieve military gains in the fight against the Russian invaders.
We've got time for a couple more. We'll come to Jan Hap in row 4 here, please. Just wait for the microphone, please. Thanks.
I'm Eun-jung Lee from Yonhap News TV, South Korea, and I saw your statement on the military satellite launch of North Korea, and also North Korea and Russia is deepening its military cooperation. Was this issue mentioned during this meeting? Thank you.
So what we have seen, and that also demonstrates the weakness of Russia, is that they are more and more dependent on countries like North Korea and Iran for weapons delivery. North Korea has delivered military support, including ammunition, to Russia. And Russia and North Korea are working more closely together. Then we also saw the launch of the military satellite. This is something we condemn because it's in clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions, and it also is also part of the nuclear and missile program of North Korea, which is dangerous, irresponsible, and also a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions.
We'll go to ATV in the middle of the 4th row, please.
Thank you. Fjaka Vitako from ATV Kosovo. So what is NATO's message on peace and stability after the incident in Banjska Zvečan, where a Kosovo police officer was killed? And do you see the association of Serb-majority municipalities as the right step for Kosovo to feel secure from future possible attacks like the other one during September, but also the stability and security in the entire Western Balkans? Thank you.
Also, over the last few months, or the last year, we have seen some serious incidents of violence in Kosovo. I just visited Kosovo. And what we saw this spring was an attack on NATO peacekeepers. 93 NATO soldiers were wounded, some of them life-changing wounds, and that's totally unacceptable. And then we also saw the Banjska incident where actually people were killed. And of course this is serious. This highlights the challenges we face in Kosovo and the importance of all sides to de-escalate, to refrain from actions that can further increase tensions and refrain from any inflammatory rhetoric that can increase tensions. This is my message. This was my message also in my meetings in Pristina and in Belgrade. The message is that Pristina and Belgrade has to engage in good faith in the EU-facilitated dialogue. Kosovo is an example of how NATO and the European Union are working very closely together. EU is in charge of the diplomatic efforts. We are present with thousands of troops on the ground, and actually as a result of this we have added 1,000 more NATO troops to our presence in Kosovo, to roughly 5,000. I believe that the proposal of an association of Serb-majority municipalities could be a way forward to try to find a solution and to make progress within the EU-facilitated dialogue. So yes, that's absolutely something that should be looked into.
Time for one more. We'll go to Buka here in the front, please, in the middle.
Thank you, Slađan Tomić, Buka Magazine, Bosnia. Is NATO going to send more troops to Bosnia? If yes, when? Thank you.
So, NATO has a presence of 5,000 troops in Kosovo. We have a military headquarters in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I visited the headquarters, but there we are working with and supporting the efforts of EUFOR, the EU force. And again, an example of how NATO and the EU are working very closely together, and of course to a large extent we also speak about the same nations, EU and NATO allies. I welcome the fact that the EUFOR force, the mandate, the UN mandate for that force was renewed. If that hadn't happened, of course, then we had to consider what NATO should do. But I'm glad that the mandate for this EU force was renewed. We have made it clear that we cannot allow a security vacuum in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And that's also the reason why we so strongly supported the renewal of the UN mandate for the EU force, or the EUFOR Althea, and with this support from NATO, we have something called the Berlin Plus arrangements, which allows NATO to help and support with command and control for this force.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Well, also we had a good discussion on that, and the message from the NATO allies was very clear that that we would like to see a ratification finalized as soon as possible. We agreed in Vilnius on the importance of concluding the ratification process for Sweden. Therefore, I welcome that President Erdogan some weeks ago submitted the papers for ratification to the Turkish Parliament, and that the Turkish Parliament, the Foreign Relations Committee, has started their deliberations on that document. The fact that President Erdogan submitted the papers also means that he actually recommended ratification, because that's part of this proposal for the Parliament. And therefore, also in line with what we agreed in Vilnius, I also expect that they will now work with the Parliament to ensure ratification, because the agreement in Vilnius actually 2 steps. One, to submit the papers for ratification. That has happened. And second, to work with the Parliament to ensure ratification. So we will continue to work on this, and the sooner the better, because it will be good for Sweden, it will be good for NATO, and good for all NATO allies to have Sweden as a full member.
Thank you very much.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Test, 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 test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Test, 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 test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Test, test, test. Test, test, test. Test, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Test, OK.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. In March of 2021, I came here to NATO to affirm President Biden's commitment to rebuild, to revitalize, to re-energize our core alliances and partnerships. Indeed, they're our greatest strategic asset, an unmatched network of alliances and partnerships. And I did this at NATO because some back then were questioning its relevance, its capacity, its unity. As we meet here today in Brussels, those who bet against NATO have clearly been proven wrong. NATO today is bigger, It's stronger, it's more united, it's more capable than ever. In Vilnius, NATO's leaders agreed to the most ambitious plans since the end of the Cold War to adapt and to strengthen our alliance. And we're now delivering on those plans. 19 NATO allies either are meeting their Wales commitment or have credible plans to do so by 2024. In other words, devoting 2% of their budgets to defense spending. That's 2/3 of our alliance. Allies are increasing contributions of forces and other capabilities. We are working together to boost our joint industrial defense capacity. We've added our 31st ally, Finland, and the 32nd, Sweden, will soon be among us. NATO will continue to adapt to meet 21st century challenges, threats, whether it's Russian aggression, coercion from China, challenges in cyberspace, terrorism, the entire gamut of things that we have to be concerned about as an alliance. And in fact, it's this capacity to evolve that has made NATO the world's indispensable alliance for 75 years, and the actions we've taken in Vilnius and that we're taking here over the last couple of days are setting NATO up to remain that indispensable alliance for the next 75 years. The meetings here this week focused on critical steps that we can take to advance NATO's revitalization in time for the historic Washington Summit, the 75th anniversary summit that'll take place next year. First, we focused on NATO's enduring support and commitment to Ukraine. And I have to tell you, listening to all of our colleagues around the table, every single one expressed strong, enduring support for Ukraine. Some are questioning whether the United States and other NATO allies should continue to stand with Ukraine as we enter the second winter of Putin's brutality. But the answer here today at NATO is clear and it's unwavering. We must and we will continue to support Ukraine. Ensuring that Russia's war of aggression remains a strategic failure is as vital today as when the Kremlin launched that war almost 2 years ago. Now, our adversaries are not standing on the sidelines. Most of the drones that we've seen used in the biggest ever drone attack on Kyiv just last weekend, those were made and supplied by Iran. North Korea is providing significant arms shipments to Russia. Stakes for all of us are clear, and again, I heard this from everyone around the table. And we must send an unequivocal message. No country will be allowed to redraw borders by force. That's an interest of every single ally around the table. It's an interest of many countries beyond this alliance with whom we've been working since February of 2022. And it's also why we're accelerating efforts to enable Ukraine to stand strongly on its own feet, militarily, economically, democratically. Even as we're supporting Ukraine's fight today, we are helping them build a military that is capable of deterring and defending against aggression far into the future. The supplemental budget request the President made is a demonstration of our own commitment to that goal, and we're looking to Congress to approve it in the coming weeks. Another critical point that is really worth underscoring, and it's reinforced by everything that I've seen over the last 2 days here. When it comes to Ukraine, the United States is not standing alone. We provided about $77 billion in assistance to Ukraine. Our European allies, over the same period of time, have provided more than $110 billion. So we often talk about burden sharing and the imperative of burden sharing. When it comes to Ukraine, that's clearly what we've seen and what we continue to see. Ukraine knows that its future is a free, vibrant democracy, and its path to NATO and the European Union depend on its ongoing reform efforts. And Kyiv is committed to seeing those reforms through. We also heard that today from its foreign minister. So these were some of the issues that the alliance discussed with Foreign Minister Kuleba, and this was the first foreign ministers meeting we've had of the new NATO-Ukraine Council, with Ukraine sitting at its place at the NATO table. We also discussed NATO's ongoing role in promoting peace and security in the Western Balkans. Now, when I started out in this line of work 30 years ago, front and center in our concern and the concerns of countries around the world, and certainly in the transatlantic area, the Balkans, Bosnia, and then Kosovo. The one thing we don't need is a return to the future when it comes to conflict in the Balkans. NATO has a critical role to play in helping states in the region make progress on their paths to EU membership and to broader European stability. NATO has long provided the backbone of security in the Western Balkans. It's going to continue to do so. The alliance has responded decisively to actors who are seeking to destabilize northern Kosovo, as we saw earlier this year, deploying additional troops to KFOR. We're deepening our collaboration with the EU-led force in Bosnia and Herzegovina as well. So this was another critical part of our conversation over the last 2 days. Tonight, I'm heading to Skopje for the OSCE Ministerial Council. Despite Russia's flagrant violations of every single core principle of the Helsinki Final Act, its relentless efforts to obstruct the OSCE's work, the 50 other participating states have shown determination to make sure that the organization continues to fulfill its purpose to advance European security. And that's what we'll keep doing in Skopje. From Skopje, we head to Israel, the West Bank, and then on to the UAE, where in addition to participating in the COP, I'll have an opportunity to meet with Arab partners to discuss the conflict in Gaza. We head back to the region as the humanitarian pause that we helped to negotiate with Qatar and with Egypt has allowed scores of hostages to be released and to be reunited with their families. We're surging humanitarian assistance into Gaza to make sure that its people have what they need to get by. Looking at the next couple of days, we'll be focused on doing what we can to extend the pause so that we can continue to get more hostages out and more humanitarian assistance in. We'll discuss with Israel how it can achieve its objective of ensuring that the terrorist attacks of October 7th never happen again, while sustaining and increasing humanitarian assistance and minimizing further suffering and casualties among Palestinian civilians. We'll keep our efforts going to prevent the conflict from spreading, and of course we'll remain focused on enabling the safe departure of American citizens and other foreign nationals from Gaza. Finally, we will work to build on the principles that I set out in Tokyo a few weeks ago for the day after in Gaza, and define the steps that we and our partners in the region can take now to lay the foundation for a just and lasting peace. With that, happy to take some questions.
First question goes to Tracy Wilkinson with the LA Times.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Secretary. You spoke of the strength and unity of NATO, and you also said that there are those who question whether NATO and the United States should continue to support Ukraine at the level that it does. Could you elaborate on that? What were the anxiety levels among some of your allies here about U.S. commitment, given the voices we're hearing in parts of the United States who talk about abandoning the Ukraine cause, and especially political changes that may come next year? And then second, if I could ask you about the Israel-Gaza war, to what extent did that overshadow talks here or impact talks here or have a role in the talks here? Thank you.
Tracy, thank you. First, the second part of the question first. Yes, we certainly had conversations about Gaza, but it in no way took away from the intense focus that we've had over the last couple of days on Ukraine as well as on Western Balkans and preparing for the NATO summit in Washington next spring. With regard to Ukraine, let me say this again because it was very, very starkly clear listening to all of our colleagues around the table. Virtually to a country, I heard a strong, enduring commitment on the part of alliance members to Ukraine, to making sure that it had what it needs to defend itself, to retake territory seized from it by Russia, but also to build itself up so that it can stand strongly on its own feet, militarily, economically, and democratically. I heard no sense of fatigue or falling back. On the contrary, a determination to continue to press forward. And there's a good reason for that. I think every ally recognizes that this is a matter not only of doing the right thing, it's a matter of self-interest, including for the United States. There's a clear self-interest among allies to stand for the basic principles at the heart of the UN Charter that are being violated egregiously by Russia, because these principles matter to our own peace and security. As we've said repeatedly, If we allow a country like Russia to act with impunity, to redraw the borders of another by force, to try to determine and dictate the future of another country, if that happens with impunity, then it's open season. And any would-be aggressor, anywhere, is likely to draw lessons from that. That's why it's been so important to us, but also to every country around the table, to stand strongly with and for Ukraine. And I heard nothing to suggest the contrary. And when it comes to the United States, what I continue to see, what I continue to hear is strong bipartisan support in both chambers of Congress for Ukraine. And I think you heard Speaker Johnson address this just the other day, which is very encouraging. So we have work to do to move the supplemental budget request that the President made forward. We're determined to do that. And again, we're determined to do that because it's so clearly in our interest. And Congress, time and again, when we've gone to them, has stood up and delivered. And we expect that to happen going forward. Again, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the necessary thing to do to advance the interests of the United States.
Joe Barnes with The Telegraph.
Thank you. Joe Barnes from the Daily Telegraph. There's a growing perception that Ukraine's Western allies will move away from helping Ukraine sustain another major counteroffensive in a switch of strategy that essentially helps Ukraine hold its lines. How do you ensure that the next strategy taken by Western allies doesn't prematurely push President Zelensky and Ukraine into premature peace negotiations? And secondly, if I may, could I get your thoughts on former Secretary General Rasmussen's plan that would see Ukraine be allowed to join NATO, but without Russian-occupied territories being covered by Article 5? Thank you.
Good, thanks. So what you describe is not at all what I'm hearing, seeing, or what we're doing. The NATO countries individually, and we have now more than 50 countries that are, many of them, of course, NATO members, others not, who have been almost from day one fully part of the effort to make sure that Ukraine has what it needs, not only to defend itself against ongoing Russian aggression, but to help enable it to retake territory that Russia seized from it. And that commitment continues. And there's no move away from that. We're determined to make sure that Ukraine has what it needs, including to take back territory that Russia's taken from it. At the same time, there's also, and I think this is critically important, a commitment on the part of many countries to help Ukraine build a future force that can ensure deterrence and ensure defense against aggression going forward. And that's critically important, coupled with the efforts that we're making in other areas, for example, to generate private sector investment in Ukraine so that its economy can continue to grow, to build, and it has resources of its own, as well as making sure that it's advancing on reforms to strengthen its democracy, which will be tremendously facilitated by the fact that the European Union is engaging Ukraine on the accession process, and of course reforms are necessary for that. All of that is doing two things. It's making sure that Ukraine has what it needs in this moment to continue to deal with Russian aggression, to continue to work to take back its territory, but also sets Ukraine up strongly for the future so that it can stand strongly on its own feet, again, not only militarily, but economically and democratically. That's the single best response that we can make. And it also has this effect. The main impediment to resolving this aggression, to resolving this conflict, which no one wants more than the Ukrainian people, in fact, the only impediment is Vladimir Putin. And the extent to which he believes that he can somehow outlast Ukraine, outlast its people, outlast its supporters, may be feeding the refusal of Russia to engage in any meaningful way in diplomacy or negotiations. So the work of this alliance, the work of the individual countries that are part of this alliance, as well as many other countries around the world, to support Ukraine, to help it defend itself, as well as to set it up for the future, that's the single most effective way to disabuse Putin of this very wrong-headed notion.
Michael
and
Crowley.
on Rasmussen, I haven't focused on that. I think the alliance in Vilnius was very clear that Ukraine will become a member of NATO when all allies agree and when conditions are met. That's the policy. It was clearly stated in Vilnius, clearly reaffirmed today.
Michael Crowley with the New York Times.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Two questions on Gaza. The first is that given the large number of hostages who remain and the enormous humanitarian need in Gaza, do you believe that the current pause in fighting should be substantially extended despite concerns in Israel that it may be allowing Hamas to regroup? And is it possible that Israel's offensive would not resume at all? And secondly, you have stressed the importance of pursuing a two-state solution for long-term peace. Many people doubt that Prime Minister Netanyahu shares that vision. What is your opinion, and what are the implications if he does not?
Thanks, Michael. With regard to the pause, look, we'd like to see the pause extended because what it has enabled, first and foremost, is hostages being released, coming home, being reunited with their families. It's also enabled us to surge humanitarian assistance into the people of Gaza who so desperately need it. So its continuation, by definition, means that more hostages would be coming home, more assistance would be getting in. So clearly, that's something we want, and I believe it's also something that Israel wants. They're also intensely focused on bringing their people home. So we're working on that. As you know, we're working on that every single day. And I expect to take that up tomorrow when I'm in Israel meeting with the government. And again, we have other colleagues in the government who are intensely working on that. With regard to two states, look, I think we've been very clear from well before October 7th, in fact, from the first day of this administration, that we believe that that is the only path to enduring peace, to enduring security, to the preservation of Israel as a strong, secure, democratic and Jewish state, and Palestinians having their legitimate aspirations for a state and self-determination met. And I think the events of October 7th only further confirm that, that commitment. But all of this is a process that everyone will need to focus on. Right now, everyone is focused on the day of what's happening in Gaza right now. But we also need to be focused at the same time, and we are in conversations with many other countries, on what I've called both the day after and the day after the day after. By the day after, I mean what happens in Gaza once the campaign is over. There are important questions about its governance, its security, its reconstruction. A couple of weeks ago in Tokyo, I laid out some basic principles that we see as being necessary. But also the day after, which is how do we get on a clear path to meeting the legitimate political aspirations of the Palestinian people, which really, in our judgment, is the only way to durable peace, durable security for everyone, starting with Israel and Israelis. But these are conversations that we'll pursue in the days ahead, in the weeks ahead, in the months ahead. There's a long history here, but I think what this has done, what October 7th has done, among other things, is I think to refocus many countries in the region and well beyond on how do we help Israel ensure that this never happens again. And we believe that one component of that is putting in place the conditions for genuinely lasting, durable peace and stability. And for us, the best path there goes to two states.
And the final question goes to Alexander Baker with The Telegraph.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. How does the U.S. view the ambition of the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte to be the new Secretary General of NATO? And is the outcome of the Dutch election an obstacle?
Well, first, we have one Secretary General at a time. And as it happens, we have an extraordinary Secretary General right now, and Secretary General Stoltenberg. I said it yesterday, repeated it at the Council. His leadership over the last few years at one of the most challenging times in the history of our alliance has been nothing short of exceptional. And again, colleagues around the table said the same thing. But he still has a lot of work to do. As we head to the Washington summit, which is still many months away, we're focused intensely on that work and on working with the Secretary General to make sure that we have a successful summit and the alliance continues to deliver on the commitments that its leaders have made, particularly the Vilnius summit. With regard to the future and the next Secretary General, I'm not going to comment on internal deliberations within the alliance. We will work that out. We'll work on it together. And I would expect that by the Washington summit, we'll be in a position to talk about it more clearly, more directly. Thanks.
Thank you all.